I am David Friedman, the director of the Anti-Defamation League's Washington, D.C. regional office, and we are extremely proud to be in partnership tonight with our good friends and strong partners, the Program for Jewish Civilization. It is also my privilege to introduce Deborah Lipstadt. She is Doro Professor of Modern Jewish and Holocaust Studies at Emory University in Atlanta, and half of my staff are graduates of Emory. Her book, The Eichmann Trial, was described by the New York Times Book Review as having done a service by recovering the event as gripping legal drama, as well as a hinge moment in Israel's history and in the world's delayed awakening to the magnitude of the Holocaust. The Wall Street Journal described the book as thoughtfully researched and clearly written account of the courtroom proceedings and of the debate spurred by the trial. Her book, which many of you have undoubtedly read, History on Trial, My Day in Court with a Holocaust Denier, is the story of her libel trial in London against David Irving, who sued her for calling him a Holocaust denier and right-wing extremist. The trial was described by the Daily Telegraph as having done for the new century what the Nuremberg tribunals or the Eichmann trial did for earlier generations. The Times of London described it as history has had its day in court and scored a crushing victory. The judge found David Irving to be a Holocaust denier, a falsifier of history, a racist, and an anti-Semite. According to the New York Times, the trial put an end to the premise that Mr. Irving is anything but a self-promoting apologist for Hitler. At Emory, Professor Lipstadt directs the website HDOT, Holocaust Denial on Trial, which contains answers to frequent claims made by deniers. Portions of the site are translated into Arabic, Farsi, Russian, and Turkish. Professor Lipstadt was an historical consultant to the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. She has been appointed by Presidents Clinton and Obama to the United States Holocaust Memorial Council. President George W. Bush asked her to represent the White House at the 60th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz. Ladies and gentlemen, Deborah Lipstadt.
Thank you. I would say it's a pleasure being here, but this topic is anything but a pleasure. Though I must say I've been really impressed by everything we've heard, impressed and depressed by everything we've heard this afternoon. One of the things that struck me, both in preparation for the panel, because I read the EU study, I've looked at the ADL study, I read the Pew study also on that raised certain questions about anti-Semitism, not the Pew study done here, but the Pew study done in Europe. The fact is that while we have lots of anecdotes, and the anecdotes are important, we have facts and we have figures. And it's not just people telling one another or the same story making the rounds, and we are all schreien Gewalt, or the sky is falling, but we have facts and figures which are disturbing. Whether it's the increase in anti-Semitic acts, not always, as a number of our panelists pointed out, not always violent anti-Semitic acts, but anti-Semitic acts nonetheless. Whether it's comments, whether it's incidents such as we saw in the suburbs of Paris in the clip that was shown, which was so disturbing. There's enough anecdotal evidence to disturb us, but when you couple the anecdotal evidence with the facts and the figures, it is a deeply disturbing development. I think the conflation of anti-Semitism and anti-Israelism is a very important point to make, and a complicated point. Some of you may have seen the op-ed I had in the New York Times a few weeks ago. Some of you, I don't know, millions, I was told. I've never written anything that's been seen by, except some posts on Facebook. No, not even that. There was a letter, a number of letters in response, one of them from a Episcopal, a Reverend Bruce Shipman, then associated with Yale, who essentially blamed the rise in anti-Semitic actions on events in Gaza. Now, it's clear, as we heard from a number of the speakers, Dr. Fainberg, other members of the panel, that there is a conflation. That during these events, during whether it's Operation Cast Lead or whether it's the recent events in Gaza or other things, there is a dramatic increase in anti-Semitism. But first, again, as we saw, it doesn't go down afterwards. And to simply say that, well, if the situation in the Middle East were solved, this would go away, doesn't answer the question. It doesn't answer the question of why you see signs, Jews to the gas, why you have Jews being frightened to walk in certain places, parents telling their children don't wear kippot, don't wear yarmulkes, head coverings, or anything that identifies you as a Jew in certain areas of town, or when you hear tourists going to Europe, again, this is often American tourists, but debating whether they should eat in the kosher restaurant or just go into the kosher restaurant and order food and eat in their hotel room because it's safer. That's a moment of great concern. Many years ago, when I was a graduate student at Brandeis University, I had a professor, Ben Halpern, who said to us something which is coming true again. He said that in history, the one place where the far right and the far left meet is on anti-Semitism. And this is not a new development. He was talking about the 19th century. He was talking about the early 20th century. It's once again the case. Both come to it from different motivations, both come to it from different perspectives, but the fact that you fall so reflexively into the anti-Semitic mode is exceptionally important, and it brings us back, Jack, to the question of historical context. This is not something new. This is not something de novo or ex nihilo. It's something out of nothing, but it's something out of a millennia of a history of anti-Semitism, adapted to, as it adapts itself, almost like a viral strain, to the contemporary situation. It's also where anti-establishment figures or groups, student often meet until far-right intellectuals. It's not just the intellectuals will engage in, or these are anti-intellectuals, but again, you often find that conflation. I think it's something that we've seen in Europe as well. There's another form of anti-Semitism which didn't come up on the panel, and I'm not surprised, but it's something, of course, to which I am particularly sensitive. And I was just in Cambridge in England at the university a few months ago talking about Holocaust denial. And there are two forms of Holocaust denial. There's the Holocaust denial, the kind of Holocaust denial that I fought when I was in fighting against the charges, the libel charges brought against me by David Irving. I stress that because I can tell you that there are many people who think it's the other way around. I don't believe in suing people over issues of history. I was the defendant in that case. But I call that hardcore Holocaust denial. Hardcore Holocaust denial in that it denies the facts of the Holocaust. There were no gas chambers. Hitler didn't intend to kill the Jews. There weren't 6 million Jews killed. This is all a hoax perpetrated by the Jews in order to get both both to get money, reparations, and to get a state of Israel. Of course, that last point for hardcore deniers is the answer they give, which would be when you tell people the Holocaust didn't happen. The natural question, of course, is to ask, well, why would the Jews make up this hoax? And the denier's answer is, well, what did the Jews, quote unquote, get out of the Holocaust? A state, and the traditional answer is a state and reparations, which is a fancy word for money. Now, just one comment on the state, I don't think that's correct. I think that's too glibly accepted. There was a Peel Commission in the 30s which called for the establishment of a Jewish entity. There would have been some Jewish political entity in the Middle East even without a Holocaust. And if the state of Israel had been simply and solely an answer to the Holocaust, it would have been established in 1945, 46, 47. It was established in 48 because the British pulled out. But setting that aside, those are facts. Let's not be confused by the facts right now. The traditional perception is that Israel was a world response to the Holocaust. When deniers explain that this myth, the so-called myth of the Holocaust, was created by Jews in order to get the state and to get money, of course what they're doing is giving an answer which is rooted in anti-Semitic stereotypes. In order for, anti-Semitism is a form of prejudice. The etymology of prejudice, prejudge. Don't confuse me with the facts. I've made up my mind. And these prejudices, they're specific prejudices, certainly in this country, which apply to particular ethnic groups, groups with certain sexual orientations, homosexual groups, etc. So the prejudice, of course, about Jews is about money and secret power. Jews manipulating their power secretly to get the majority to follow their ways, even if it might harm the majority. That stereotype has its roots in the deicide story, in the story of the death of Jesus, that the Jews manipulate. Everybody in the story is Jewish except the Romans who actually killed him, but that's, again, facts. You forget those. No, I'm being dead serious here. That the Jews, for pieces of silver, conspired to harm and to cause the death of Jesus, and to harm the majority. And from that story, you get the roots of the anti-Semitic stereotype. But if you look at other minority groups, ethnic groups in the United States, there are other stereotypes associated with them. The stereotype, and I stereotype associated with the African American community, African Americans in the United States, was shiftless and lazy. Stereotypes, not correct, but again, that's the stereotype. The stereotype associated with Italians, mafioso. You can read Cuomo's, Governor Cuomo, the previous Governor Cuomo's, or even Lee Iacocca's autobiographies, where they talk about facing those kinds of stereotypes. So that you've got to, when you're making a prejudicial charge against a group, you've got to pick the right stereotype so that it makes sense to the listener. So when you say to someone, oh, the Jews exaggerate what happened in the Holocaust, made up what happened in the Holocaust, because of this, you're saying, because of wanting money and wanting a state, you're saying something that makes sense to the person who's been exposed to anti-Semitism. That's one form of Holocaust denial. That form of Holocaust denial has been pretty much discredited. It's been discredited as a result of my trial and the tremendous work done by the historians and the lawyers who presented my case and who defended me. It's been discredited by people like Ahmadinejad, who in each time he made one of his Holocaust denial statements would get tremendous scorn heaped upon him, and the world would be outraged. It was not outraged when he said, "I'm going to wipe Israel off the map," but it was outraged when he made these Holocaust denial statements. But we've seen something else arise, which is, I'll use a very academic term, much more squishy, or non-academic term, much more squishy and harder to define, harder to place than hardcore Holocaust denial. It reminds me of Justice Potter Stewart's definition of pornography. I can't define it, but I know it when I see it. And I call it a softcore Holocaust denial. Softcore Holocaust denial is talking about the Nazi-like tactics of the IDF. Softcore Holocaust denial is talking about the genocide of the Palestinians. Now, I want to make a point here. You can disagree 120% with Israel's policies vis-a-vis the Palestinians. You can think they are completely wrong. You can think they are unfair. You can think they are a violation of human rights, et cetera, et cetera. But to talk about a genocide is to simply ignore, what the true meaning of the true definition or the UN definition of genocide is, the Raphael Lemkin definition of what genocide is, and B, to distort what is going on right now, and C, to distort what happened during World War II and the Holocaust. Another form of softcore Holocaust denial, something we have one of our State Department representatives who was until recently in Hungary. Karen, you know this well. What you see when you see the Hungarian government's treatment of the Holocaust, of Hungary's role in the Holocaust. A number of the speakers made reference to that, where the role of Hungary, which was and the Hungarian gendarmes and the Hungarian police, Arrow Cross, etc., in the murder of the Jews was seminal. You spoke about that too, Professor. When Adolf Eichmann came into Hungary a few days after the Germans took over, he came with 200 men, something like that. With 200 men, you do not murder 500,000 people in the space of 2 months. It was May, June, July, 2 to 3 months. It's just impossible. He had tremendous help and tremendous support from the Hungarian infrastructure. That's being written out of Hungarian history, whether it's in the House of Terror, whether it's in this new planned Holocaust Museum, whether it's in the memorial, which I only saw parts of it hadn't been finished when I was there a couple of months ago. But it's a rewriting. It's the same rewriting you see in the Ukraine, you see it in Lithuania, where the Holocaust and the suffering of those, whichever country it is, the peoples under Stalinism, under communism, is equated. And you have this strange situation where Jews are both commemorated as victims and then flipped over and designated as perpetrators for having brought about this kind of suffering on the Ukrainian people, the Belarusians, the Lithuanians, etc. That's softcore Holocaust, and it's much harder to fight. The hardcore can be fought with documents. The Holocaust has the dubious distinction of being the best documented Holocaust genocide that we know of, and it takes a lot of work, but it can easily be done to answer those questions. Those other things, the softcore denial is much harder, and that's why I use that term. It's squishier. It's harder to fight and to explain in a way that's immediately accessible to the general public. Now, of course, and by the way, I'm sure many of you notice this, but I use the term hardcore and softcore. It's usually what we use in relation to pornography. We have one of the world's leading linguists here who's sensitive to language. I chose that, Deborah, on purpose because I think Holocaust denial is a form of pornography. What it does to history is a pornographic thing. Now, is this 1939? Is this the eve of the end of European Jewry? Many Americans, particularly American Jews, have that sense, are sure that that is the case. I would disagree wholeheartedly. I would disagree for a number of reasons. First of all, 1939 already happened. The Holocaust happened. Though the Jews to whom it happened were surprised. And it's easy for us to say, oh, they should have seen it coming. I think that's a very is comfortable, and that's the comfort of 2020 hindsight. They were surprised by this, as was most of the world, and as it should have been surprised by it. We know what is possible, so we won't be and we can't be surprised. And that means your reaction to these events, this kind of meeting tonight, is quite a contrast to the years of the 30s, A. B, just take Chancellor Merkel's speech of yesterday. If you haven't read it, I urge you to do so, whether you look in Die Zeit and you read it in the German. It's all over the web in English as well. But I think the statement that you may have quoted, Andrew, that she made, in fact, it's the one that's quoted in the last paragraph of today's New York Times, where she says, just, I want to make one thing absolute, I paraphrase here, one thing absolutely clear for those of you who are prejudiced against Jews, for those of you who are attacking Jews, you are attacking me, you are attacking all of us, you are attacking all of Germany. That's the kind of response. In other words, this is not something of, you've got to be nice to the Jews, but this is the kind of response, and I don't know if this is what they're whispering, what Stacy and her colleagues are whispering in the ears of other leaders, but that's the kind of response that is necessary. And then finally, of course, one doesn't like to speak of Israel as primarily a haven. It's much more than that. But there is a place for Jews to go. You know, and there's the joke that is told, I don't know that it was really told during the 30s in Germany, but German Jews used to tell it after the war, of the Jew who went into a travel agency in 1938-39 in Berlin, and he said to the travel agent, I want a ticket to somewhere. And the travel agent thought this was very weird, took a globe, put it in front of the Jew and said, show me where. And the Jew studied it and looked in each country. No, they won't let me in, and they won't let me in, and they won't let me in. And then he turned to the travel agent and said, do you have anything else to offer? It's that humor noir, you know, that we're so good at. There is a place for Jews to go as a small percentage. Small but significant percentage of, again, as you pointed out, Andrew, of French Jews are opting to do. Having said that it's not 1939, I said what I said in my article in the New York Times, I repeat, but it's bad enough. You don't need 1939, you know, someone saying, wake me when it's a Holocaust, and then I'll get involved. In fact, looking again, historical context, if you look back at historical context, and this is counterfactual, so we don't know if it's true or not, but I think the fact of the matter is that the time for the rest of the world to have stopped the Holocaust was not in 1940 or 41 or 42, when the killings begin. Then at that point, there was really very little the world could do. The time to have stopped it was long before anybody imagined that it was coming. 1933, 34, 35, the Berlin Olympics, 36, 37, 38, instead of giving the German government repeated signs that the green light was that they could increase the anti-Semitism. The time to stop these things is before we can even imagine that they might happen. So my question would be, and it was a question I posed just last week when I was in London to people who are in this very cohort, are where are the intellectual and the cultural elites in these various countries, particularly the Western European countries, in speaking out against this. And what I said to, sitting with one of the most prominent playwrights in England, and what I said to him, he's a friend, I've known him for a while, we've worked together on various things. What I said to him was, these elites have to be speaking out not because you're worried about our safety. I said, we worry enough about our safety. We don't need you to speak out and say, oh, it's terrible what they're doing to our neighbors, the Jews. I said, if you care about the multicultural, multifaceted, liberal, small l, enlightened, supposedly enlightened society in which you live, You live, you work, and you love that society because it has allowed you to do the work that you do, whether it's intellectual, whether it's cultural, whether it's artistic. Then you've got to speak out. Because the threat that's coming down the pike, it'll be the Jews first, but it's the society that you live which is being threatened. And whether I'm not predicting that there'll be a takeover of Europe by radical Muslims, but there is enough of a push from these radical segments of the Muslim community and a reluctance by many other Muslims to speak out, whether out of fear or whether out of, because it might, if I criticize the radical Muslim, it'll look like I'm pro-Israel or I'm pro-Semitic or something like that, and a reluctance by the cultural and intellectual and political educated elites to speak out for fear of looking like they are being anti-multicultural, anti-Muslim, anti-minority. The terrible tragedy that was described just, I think it became public about 2 weeks ago in England of young girls being forced into prostitution, sexual slaves by immigrants, who lived in this community, and the reluctance of certain professionals, social work professionals, police professionals, to say anything because it might look like they were anti-immigrant, and they didn't. It was PC gone mad. And I'm not talking about my computer. Political correctness gone mad in the worst sort of way. It's also, I think we have to be careful to borrow a phrase made popular by our previous president, the bigotry of low expectations. To say, people who said to me, well, yes, there were signs in Berlin, Jews to the gas, but it was only Muslims demonstrating, or it was primarily Muslims demonstrating. They were the ones carrying the signs, you know, Israel equals Hitler, or Netanyahu equals Hitler, Israel equals Nazis. And I think that is a bigotry of low expectations. If these are communities and generations, young people, and if you looked at the pictures, again, this is anecdotal and impressionistic, but most of those protesters certainly seem to be young people. If you expect them to be part of European society, then I think there have to be certain expectations. There is no magic bullet to doing this. For many years, many people thought, well, we'll teach them about the Holocaust. I think that teaching about the Holocaust is exceptionally important. But I don't think it should be proposed as this is an answer to anti-Semitism. In fact, I think it sometimes works in the reverse kind of way. And believe me, I spend all my creative moments teaching about the Holocaust. I'm the last one to think it's not important. Otherwise, I wouldn't be doing it. But don't instrumentalize it as this is a way to fight anti-Semitism. The final point that I'd like to make, and that is that at the same time that I'm glad that there's been this attention, I was amazed at the reaction to my article. I'm just now have a graduate student going through analyzing the responses to the article. The editors of the New York Times cut off the responses at 698. Which is quite amazing, and we're trying to see if we know it's only the people who bothered to write and got their responses on the web page, but see if we can make some sense of the responses. But at the same time that we're concerned, at the same time that we're holding seminars and quality evenings, informational evenings, such as tonight, I have to also say there's a potential for danger in our reaction. There's no question that this is a cause of great concern, but at the same time, let's not write the obituaries for European Jewish communities that are vibrant, that are alive, whether France last Sunday in England, or a week and a half ago, I was in England in Regent's Park, and there was a klezmer festival. It was a gorgeous day, people were there, yes, there was security, but you always have CST, the Community Security Trust, maybe they were out in higher number, people picnicking, children dancing, etc. It was a wonderful event, but someone looked around, and this was, again, impressionistic, but someone has been going every year, and he felt attendance is noticeably smaller this year, and it was a perfect late summer, early fall day, so it was not the weather. Whether Jews are frightened to come out or not, I don't know, but nonetheless, there are vibrant communities, and it would be both a degree of hubris, and not just hubris, for us sitting here to say, oh, that's a graveyard, that's finished. I don't think it's true, I don't think it's right, and I don't think it's a positive way of looking at the situation. And the other thing I think, and this is something that whether it's American Jews, whether it's the Israeli community, think of ourselves as the font of wisdom for what European Jews should do. There are some very smart, very savvy people in these communities. I see Dr. Fainberg shaking her head yes. They know this situation. It's not up to us to come and tell them what to do, to be sensitive, to be supportive. But these people aren't dolts. You know, they know and they understand. And right now, it's a hell no, we won't go that many of them are feeling. We're going to stay here. We're going to stick it out. We're going to improve this situation. And as I don't remember who said it in their 30-minute summary, but I think it's very much true and something I thought about but had never fully articulated to myself before. There's also an opportunity here, an opportunity to turn to the EU and say, EU, you treasure what you have. Now is the time to do something. Again, the same way as I presented it in relation to the cultural and intellectual elites, not because you just are so benevolent to the Jews in your community, not at all, but because you care about the European society which has been created and particularly sustained and nurtured and grown in the wake of World War II. Finally, to talk about the fact that we both in the United States, whether in Israel I think is a different story, but certainly in the United States, is to be careful to be using this increase in anti-Semitism, again, because it's not just European. Australia, we've seen some very disturbing incidents, South America, and even here in the United States, we've seen disturbing incidents. To be careful of using that as a raison d'etre for Jewish identity. Be Jews because of anti-Semitism. Enhance your Jewish identity. Be strong, affiliate, show up because of anti-Semitism. The philosopher Emil Fackenheim, in the wake of the Holocaust, quite a few years after the Holocaust, but in one of his books, I think published in the late 60s or early 70s, talked about the fact that after the Shoah, after the Holocaust, there was a 614th commandment. Jews traditionally believe there's 613 commandments in the Torah. There was now a 614th commandment. Thou shalt not hand Hitler a posthumous victory. Thou shalt live as Jews. And it was much more nuanced than that. Fackenheim went on to talk about affirmation of belief. But what happened was that tagline was taken out. And for many in my baby boom generation and in subsequent generations, it became, I'm going to be Jewish, you say in Hebrew, dafka lahachis, just to show you. Well, that's a terrible shortchanging of the rich and multifaceted millennia of Jewish tradition, of Jewish culture, of Jewish beliefs. Judaism has never said, be Jewish because of the anti-Semite. It's afal pi, be Jewish despite the anti-Semitism. Be Jewish because of how much, and the program here in Jewish civilization is again an affirmation of that, how much wisdom, how much, what a contribution Jewish civilization has made to the world over the past millennia. Just think of the first part of the 20th century and name the leading intellectuals in Central and in Europe. Kafka, Freud, et cetera. You can go on, you can name the rest, primarily Jews. We've given to the world. Judaism and Jewish tradition, Jewish civilization has given so much to the world. We shouldn't be saying I'm a Jew because of anti-Semitism or using anti-Semitism as a means of enhancing our Jewish identity or strengthening our Jewish identity, but saying despite. Not because of, despite, and there's a world of difference in that. So I think that's the challenge to us. The challenge to us is to be vigilant. The challenge to us to be supportive of Jews in other countries, but then again, never to let that become the shortcut to Jewish identity, the shortcut to Jewish affiliation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I won't even try to summarize this very wide-ranging and thought-provoking thing. I have about 17 subjects just on my list here that Professor Lipstadt hit. Because I do want to get to our questions for this evening. I mean, I'll start by saying, how did I spend my summer? Which was essentially looking at anti-Israel demonstrations in Europe, looking at films, looking at photos, and what did I see are exactly these topics, these phrases that you talked about Palestinian genocide, to stop the Palestinian genocide, comparing Israel to the Nazis. These were main themes in many of these demonstrations, which means that my boss is going to be very surprised to find out he's been paying me to watch pornography.
By the way, just one point on that. Many of those comparisons and distortions have their roots, by the way, in the USSR. Particularly in the wake of the Six-Day War, when the USSR upticked its, and increased and enhanced its spread of anti-Semitism, Zionism is racism, et cetera, and many of them have their roots in that.
Well, I'll say the first question I want to ask has to do with, you mentioned the failure of elites to speak out, and we spoke before about the failure at some of these demonstrations for large-scale support. Compare what we saw 20 years ago when the cemetery in Carpentras in France was desecrated, and there were 250,000 people who come out. And now when there are synagogues being attacked, there are 10,000 who come out.
If that much.
Right. I was trying to be generous. Do you think, in looking at Holocaust-related issues, is this fading of the commitment to fight anti-Semitism, do you think this is related to Holocaust now fading into more of a historical context? Or do you think this has to do with another issue that you brought up as well, which is this identification with Israel, that people are scared to come out to stand up against anti-Semitism because they're afraid of being seen as pro-Israel?
Mm-hmm. I think it's more the latter. I think, yes, there's been a certain degree. Look, I have two cousins. My mother came from a very large family, so her eldest sister was, I think, 12 years older than she was. So I have cousins who are 12, 13, 14 years older than I am. Two of them grew up in Cincinnati. When any of you have spent any time in Cincinnati, you know that it's in Ohio, but it's really a southern city. It's right over the border of Kentucky. Their parents were immigrants from Poland. They had come well before the Holocaust, and they came in the 20s, the teens, the 20s. And it was a struggling family, and slowly a nice business, not anything humongous, but a nice business was built up. And in the business, their father, who had a junkyard, it was essentially a junkyard. Today we'd call it metal reclamations, but a junkyard is a junkyard. He had an individual worked for him, name was Charlie, I believe Charlie Wilson. Charlie Wilson was an older man. Charlie Wilson had been born a slave on a plantation. Charlie Wilson had friends in the neighborhood. Sometimes he took my cousins to visit them. One of them was a woman who was even older than he, who remembered slavery much. He was a young child, remembered slavery better, and she used to sing them slave songs. So for two cousins of mine, one of whom is, I think, 14 years older, one is 15 years older. Slavery is part of their childhood stories. For me, no matter how much I see slavery as a blot on this country, which I love and which I'm part of and which I grew up in, et cetera, it's something of the 19th century. Its legacy, of course, is the 20th and stretches into the 21st century. But of course it's going to be different. Of course it's going to be different. So how we remember will be different. But I think it's something else. I think in part what we're seeing is an increase in the world's tolerance of anti-Semitism. That people may have thought certain things, but they feel free to say them now. You know, and I've heard people say, well, I'd rather have someone say something because then I know what they're thinking. I don't think that's true. They're all sort of pejorative. The N-word. People grew up using the N-word. There's still people who think in those terms, but they know they can't say it. People grew up, my memory, making terrible sexist comments about women. Oh, it's just a joke. Now they know you can't say that. But it seems to be the reverse with anti-Semitism, that certain things can be said now that couldn't be said before.
That ties very well into the first question we got from the audience, which is about the dividing line between criticism and prejudice. You mentioned both. And the question is, when and how does criticism cross over to prejudice?
You know, there used to be, I don't remember to whom it was attributed, but the definition of anti-Semitism was someone who hates Jews too much. You know, we're a people of perverse humor. Get over it, you know? Accept it. I think you can be critical of Israel. Look, if you want to read criticism of Israel, read Haaretz. You know, I mean, you just read Haaretz. The Israelis are the most self-critical people I've seen. I was chuckling, again, in a perverse kind of way, when there was initially some attempt to eliminate Israel funding for the London Jewish Film Festival because Israel had funded certain films. All the films that are funded by the Israeli government or the Keren, I forget what it is, the fund for Israeli filmmakers, 99% of them are terribly critical of Israel. And you have, you know, certain Jews saying, why are we seeing these films? I said, because they're Israeli films. But, you know, I think that criticism is not only acceptable, it's a desideratum. You want to have a vibrant critical. You don't want people thinking in lockstep and afraid to criticize. But when it becomes knee-jerk, when it becomes only focused on Israel. I was at a briefing today at the Holocaust Museum where a Christian minister who's based in Baghdad was speaking about what's going on with ISIS, and there was a Muslim woman who was his colleague, an associate, and she was talking about what is being done to the Christians of the Middle East, particularly they were talking about Iraq. It's horrifying, yet you hear this silence in that regard, and at some point you want to say, how come? Where's the outrage? And I don't think Israel wants to be compared to ISIS at all. You know, I don't mean to suggest that. Israelis hold themselves up to a higher level and claim to have a higher moral level even in war, and that's why some of the things that happen in Gaza were so disturbing to so many people. But I think this unidimensional focus, this twisting and this turning of the facts is when it becomes prejudice and not criticism.
Okay, so now that we've identified part of the problem here, the next question then is, what is the antidote to anti-Semitism?
My God, you know, if I had that answer, I would give it to you. You'd bring it to New York. I'd give it to Stacy. She'd bring it to Ira and whatever. When I chose a profession, I chose to be a historian because it already happened. So you were always right. Maybe your interpretation was wrong. Sociologists, no, this is true. Sociologists are predicting the future. Their only saving grace is that nobody remembers what they said. So when they're wrong, you know, nobody holds them to it. If there are any sociologists here, I apologize, but it's true. I don't know. I wish I knew what the answer was. I really wish I knew what the answer was. If I knew what the answer was, I would, you know, write it and say it. I do think one of the answers is and I said it in my presentation. First of all, no bigotry of low expectations. No excusing, well, this is always how it's been, and asking those, or demanding, not asking, but demanding, expressing our deep, deep disappointment in those who claim to be of a higher, of an intellectual, cultural, political elite, of their failure to be outraged, of their what's wrong with them that you're not deeply, deeply disturbed by what you see happening? You should be more disturbed than I, because it's happening in your community.
One subject that we haven't really touched on that a questioner brings up, what, if any, has been the response of the Catholic Church in Europe to this rise of anti-Semitism?
You know, I don't really know I have an impression, but I would turn to you, turn around to you, because you're more familiar, and some of the other specialists we had here. Have you seen a strong response from the Catholic Church? Pope Francis has said some things, but I don't, you know, I haven't noticed exceptionally strong.
There have been exceptions that have, bad exceptions that have come out in news reports, certainly, but in general, I mean, from the higher, from the top, there have been very good.
Very little. That's my impression, right?
So this is an interesting question. I'll try to paraphrase it.
Rolling.
Jewish support for Israel. Does the reflection on the Jewish communities of Israeli actions, is that a function of Jewish support, Jewish communal support for Israel?
In other words, if we didn't support Israel, they wouldn't attack us, etc. I don't think the anti-Semites are that rational. You know, that was not a joke, but you can laugh. I mean, I don't think they're that rational. I think I think, you know what, you want to look at history again, the context that we've heard about, the historical context that you've spoken about a number of times and been referred to. In Hungary, when Adolf Eichmann was sitting with the Arrow Cross and others, Hungarians, to figure out where to begin the deportations. Many of the Hungarians wanted to begin in Budapest. Get them out of Budapest. And Eichmann said, no, we're going to start in the Carpathians. You know, Wiesel describes that in Night, in the beginning pages of Night. We're going to start in the Carpathians for a number of reasons. That's where the Soviets are coming first. The thing that Eichmann wanted to avoid was either a Warsaw Ghetto uprising-like occurrence in Budapest or a Danish occurrence where the Jews would escape. So he said, those Jews are closer to where the Russians are. We're going to keep them from moving towards the Russians. And he said, and certain Budapest Jews said the same thing when it began, oh, they're taking the Hasidim. They're taking the ultra-Orthodox. We, the assimilated, are safe. P.S.
Okay, this next question is actually very specific. How are we involving persuasion, communication, psychology, like inoculation theory, to fight anti-Semitism?
You know, when you say that, it seems as if there's a group of elders of, I don't know, Zion or whatever, who sit around and I haven't seen much manifestation of that use in a tactic. I've seen political tactics, I've seen criticism, but I think some of the things we heard here today are the germs of responding to that. But I haven't seen many demonstrations of that.
Okay, the last question that I have from the audience, unless there are others. You mentioned reparations. Germany recently passed, or is considering now, reparations for Jews who were babies and young children during the Holocaust. Can you comment on the current and potential impact of this on renewed or increasing anti-Semitism?
You know, you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. There are older people today whose lives were seriously disrupted because as children they were hidden, they were in a terrible situation. Many of them are in need. And I think they're owed support. You know, I remember when the conversation first began about restitution of artwork and restitution of property, particularly in the former East Germany and in the former communist bloc countries. And there were people who said, oh, we shouldn't make a fuss because it's just going to rile up anti-Semites. I remember thinking that and thinking, maybe there's a point to that. And then one day I was thinking about it and I said, damn it, this was these people's property. It was their family property. It was their family possessions, whether it was a picture they loved or a picture that they could have sold to improve their position or whatever it was theirs. And for us not to, for people not to go claiming it or not to say, you know, we deserve reparations even though we were just children, and on some degree the children were affected even more strongly, because it might stir up anti-Semitism. It's like saying to your child, you know, they say Jews are so smart, so don't be so smart. Don't do so well in the exam because it might cause anti-Semitism. I go back to my earlier statement. The thing to remember, maybe to end on this point, I said it earlier, anti-Semitism is prejudice. Prejudice is irrational. It's irrational because if I decide, I see an African-American person or walking into this room and I decide they must be a certain way because they're African-American, or I meet someone who identifies as a homosexual, and I decide they must be a certain way because they're homosexual, or whatever it might be, the only way to describe it is stupid. It's irrational. It's simply stupid. Therefore, to respond to anti-Semitism and or any other form of prejudice by saying, if you aren't more like this, this will stop. To say to, and even not just prejudice, to say to young girls on a university campus, if you didn't wear long skirts, short skirts, if you didn't wear short skirts and go to these parties, you wouldn't have the problem of rape, is to blame the victim. You know, so I think that, you know, the Holocaust shouldn't be taught in Jewish studies programs. It is, but it should be taught in European studies programs. American racism shouldn't be taught in African American studies programs. It should be taught in American history, but it isn't. So for us, I'm not saying that should give you a license to go out and be obnoxious or something, but to think that for the anti-Semite who has come to this hatred in such an irrational way because they have decided because one Jew is like this, all Jews are like a certain way, to think that that how we behave in a certain way is going to affect that is wrong. That's not a license to do wrong. It's not a license, you know, to act in a certain way. But it's also a message that this is a problem. It's not the victim who's causing this problem. It's the perpetrator, and that's where our focus should be. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
That was your last question.
Thank you very much. I also just want to add again my thanks to Georgetown University and to my colleagues at the Anti-Defamation League, co-panelists as well. Thank you everyone for coming out this evening.